Of Augustine's mistress we know very little. She heads the nameless ones, those women kept in back rooms or back streets, identified not by name, but by coarse epithets, but who understand love and reality better than the men who keep them. She is mentioned only fleetingly in the Confessions. We know she and Augustine lived together for 17 years. They had a son, and at the end of the period, Augustine, planning his conversion and a more profitable marriage arranged by his mother, Saint Monica, he sent his woman back to Carthage, keeping the son with him. Legend suggests that the mistress entered a sisterhood, made a vow of chastity, and lived out a quiet life. The woman we see here follows the legend.
Forgive me, I did not mean to be unmannerly. We, the sisters, that is, we pride ourselves on hospitality. I should have offered you some fruit. Some grapes, perhaps, to quench your thirst. They're in season now. My mind is all astray. It wanders off sickly to where it has no right to be. You see, the news. I heard the news only today. A gentleman who stopped for water and a rest. I brought him bread and fruit and a little wine. I asked him, to be pleasant, if he'd traveled far. He said he'd gone on the way 2 days already, but still had far to go before reaching Hippo. Did he have family there, I asked. He was a youngish man, well-formed and gentle in his manner. He looked at me and smiled. I go to be a monk, he said. There is near Hippo a new monastery. Then, before I caught myself, the word slipped out. Augustine's? He looked up, startled. Yes, he said. Augustine's. When I did not speak, he looked at me more keenly. You know Augustine, he asked. My tongue was heavy in my mouth when I said, the name becomes well known here in Carthage. The words were blurred, like those of someone whose tongue is tied. He nodded and went on. Last year I thought of going to join him in Tagaste, but then I heard sorrow had darkened him. He lost his dearest friend. Then his son had died, a young man on whom, they said, he set his hopes. It was then I dropped the dish. The cherries were scattering across the floor. My son was dead. My son, Deodatus, as Augustine called him, our gift of God. The gentleman thought I knelt to gather up the pieces of the dish. In fact, it was because I could not hold myself together. I knelt there for a moment, my hands cold against the stone, quieting my heart. Then one by one, I picked the cherries up and the pieces of the bowl and stood upright. You've cut your hand, he said. I looked and saw a drop of blood and wondered how it was, but a single drop had appeared. and I felt all my heart's blood draining out. I put my finger to my lips and tried to smile. "I'll bring your excellency more fruit," I offered. But he shook his head. "Don't trouble," he said. "I must be on my way." "God bless you for your kindness. I will remember you. And you perhaps will pray that Augustine will welcome me into his company." That was just a little after noon. The hours have slipped away. I made this bowl. I make all the vessels that we use. It is my household task. But it's broken now. I took it to my shed where I keep my clay and tried to piece it back together, but I could not make the piece stick. A vessel I had made, shaped and held, and now clean broken through. My little bowl that bore the fruit of so much promise. This year he would be 17, the age I was when I conceived him. I'd been with Augustine just a year by then. He'd come to Carthage for his studies, whatever he would say against it later. Oh, perhaps you've heard these things. At 17, he found in Carthage the city of his dreams. When he was older and seeking after wisdom, as he called it, he would rave. It was all sin those years in Carthage, a foul cesspool in which I wallowed. But then, it was not sin to him, but life. He drank it like a Bedouin come from the desert, his hands greedy on the jug that held the water. He drank it all, the lectures, contests, games, theaters, and music, the brawling and the jostling in the streets, the pleasures of the body. Later, he railed against them all, and most against himself for his hot lust. Men need to boast, I know. What woman would deny them that? And Augustine had a greater need than most. A greater need in everything. I knew that from the first. We met in church. I was the Christian then. I watched him at the service. He was awkward, turning restlessly as though it were all new to him. After, he stood next to me, smiling. "You are a Christian too," I said. "Not yet," he laughed. "Not yet, although it is what my mother most desires." "But," I said, "you must desire it too. Else, why come here?" He laughed and leaned against me. "You are what I most desire." He was used to having what he wanted, and he had so much to help him in his suit. His eloquence, a passionate young body, and such a love to love. That was his phrase. So, we began to love. But I must tell you this. I was no street girl, then or ever. I do not mean to make excuses, but I would have you know our love was love. I loved him as my everything, and he loved me. But as men love women is one thing among many. At first our bodies were the only tongues we needed. They said everything, or so we thought. Then, little by little, he would practice his eloquence on me, declaim his speeches, read from the poetry he read in school. Practice to make me laugh or cry, arouse my anger or excite desire. And he was good at it. He was good at it all. One summer afternoon, as I was dozing in the heat, he burst through the door. "I've found the most wonderful of all poets," he cried, and began to read to me from Publius Virgilius Maro, the one they call Virgil. "Listen," he cried, "listen!" And he read to me how Aeneas came to Carthage, our very city, and met Queen Dido. He read how in a storm Dido and Aeneas took shelter in a cave, and there made love. How passion far outstripped reason, making Dido dream that they would be together forever and forever. He stopped there, his eyes shining with the splendor of the language, and I sat dreaming Dido's dream. Then, as he was taught, he pitched his voice deeper in his throat and slowed his tempo, the better to declaim the lines of anger and despair. For now, the gods reminded Aeneas of his goal, commanded that he wake from love, set sail for Latium, and found a kingdom there. Now, Dido, abandoned and betrayed, wept and stumbled in her palace, gave orders to prepare her pyre as she rehearsed her death. Here, Augustine stopped again. Together we sighed and wept for hapless Dido. Oh, those were theater tears, sweet tears, aroused by poetry. Bitter tears of that most bitter party I would not understand until the day when, flanked by Monica, his mother, and our own son, Augustine turned his back on me and sent me home from Italy to Carthage. You see, the happiness we shared was not enough for him. He always dreamed of greatness. Whatever was never quite enough. Something always lured him on. It was not only money or reputation that drove him on. I must find wisdom, he would say. A man is made for wisdom. And he would sniff at it, here and there, stretching in all directions like a camel scenting water in the desert. Wisdom. That was his daytime language with friends. But at night he spoke a different language with me. Our bodies spoke. We were comfort, strength, self-giving love to one another. It was not lust. Whatever he said later, it was not lust. I had no doubt of that, nor had he in the moon's light. But when the sun rose, then, in the daylight, his man's reason sprung awake, and he was off, and seeking wisdom, or what he called wisdom. It's not a woman's place to argue with a man, but in my heart, I did not call it wisdom. Wisdom, I think, brings peace and harmony. It takes the pieces of our lives, the smooth, the jagged, the small, the large, heavy and light, and fits them all together, as God has made the world. Water and dry land, sun and moon, deserts and wooded mountains, fitting them all together in a whole. It's not that the water parts are bad and the dry land good. The world has need of all, or so it seems to me. And so with us. The body needs the soul, and the soul the body. Things of matter are not evil. Yet sometimes Augustine rose in anguish in the morning, looking with such contempt upon his organ that sometimes I feared he would make himself a eunuch. Well, that was a foolish fear. I can tell you, there were no eunuch thoughts in him at night. But in the morning, I was Eve again. My body the lure that snared his soul in sin. He raged against his weakness and my flesh. Once I dared to say that God himself had given Eve to Adam for his need. But he replied, and it's hard to think so bright a man would say such a foolish thing. He replied that God would have done better to have given him another man for his companion. Well, by that time at Milan, our house was full. Monica had joined us with her other son and 2 young nephews. Augustine had his friends. It was a household which I had no part. And I knew that Dido's doom was soon to fall on me. Even so, the night he told me, I had no barrier against my grief. You must go back to Carthage, he said. And Deodatus would remain with him. It was better so. A young boy needs a father, and a mother too, I almost cried. Forgive me. I have no right to bitterness. I was his concubine. Just that. I understand all that. And it was better for him, so. But you see, I loved him. So we parted after 16 years. Like Dido, I had a death to die. And he needed to be free to found his kingdom, whatever that will be. And now the child we fashioned is dead. I see him as he stood the day I left, lean like his father, but straighter and not so dark. While I was working on my bowl this afternoon, I dreamed that Augustine and I met at a Deodatus grave. We comforted each other for our loss, telling stories of his childhood, as people do at death. But I must manage grief alone. Will you pray for him, our Deodatus, our gift of God, and for his father, that he will find wisdom at the end and harmony, a harmony that sees things whole and not as warring members in our body. Oh, thank you. And pray for me. Pray for me that I will be what God wishes. Pardon me? My name? Well, you see, I hesitate. I hesitate because Augustine told me when I left that he would never use my name, that thus he would protect me. Perhaps. But sometimes when my thoughts are dark, I think there might have been another reason for wishing anonymity for me. Nameless ones are the easiest forgotten. Think about it. I think you'll find it's true.